Well, here's the thing. Sometimes God calls us in our hardest moments in life. You're probably being or asking yourself, I am being called. I know I have been chosen, but I cannot do what the Lord is asking me to do. I know exactly what you're feeling. I had the same calling, and it was impossible for me to start a nonprofit organization when I was in school doing a master's degree. It was just impossible. I could not do it. But what I had to do, I had to depend on God. And I'm going to show you here, just in three different stories in the Bible, that we find that God calls us in our hardest moments in life. But what is it that we have to do when God calls? You see, sometimes you're going through the hardest situation where you have no money. You've probably been left behind. Probably people are calling you a ridicule. Nobody probably believes of what you're trying to do or say. And you feel like you're alone. But this is when God steps in. You see, let me take you to a story here in Exodus chapter 14, when Moses had actually been taking the whole people of Israel. They have been delivered from Egypt. And we know the story very well. They get to the part of the sea. And what is it that we're going to do now? The Egyptians are following them. They want to capture them, kill them, do whatever they need to do to get them back and make them slaves again. And here Moses and all the Israelites are found right in front of the Red Sea. And they start saying, okay, what are we going to do now? Well, let's see what Exodus chapter 14, if we look at Exodus chapter 14, in verse 13 says, Moses answered to the people, do not be afraid. Okay? Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need to only be still. Do not be afraid. If God has chosen you and He is calling you, I'm telling you, do not be afraid. All right? Now, we know very well what happens here in the story. Moses had to reach the point of the sea and lift his stick up, trusting that God was going to answer him. You see, Moses was called to do something radical, something for most of us is just incomprehensible, to think that God is calling at such a time like this to do something what we might find so ridiculous as this, to get to the part of the sea in that moment when you're being followed, when you're being persecuted to be killed. But He's telling them, do not be afraid. Trust in God. And he had to step into the water, lift his pole for those seas to actually depart. We have to make that step. We cannot be afraid. You have been chosen to do something special, and God has been calling you to do something special. But most likely you have been detained, you're holding back, you're in that box of your security place. But God is telling you, you need to step out, stepped into the water. Stepped into the water. Look the other story. Very similar to the story of Moses, and it's the story of Joshua. We find it in Joshua chapter 3, verse 14. And here we find when Joshua and his army, they needed to cross the Jordan River. God had been calling them to cross that Jordan River and get into Jericho. Okay? But they needed to cross the Jordan River. And it says that the river was at its flooded time. Now, if you know the area, okay, if we know the area where Jericho and all these places is the rainy season. So that river, when it gets into the rainy season, it floods about 2 miles over from all the corners to where it usually runs. Okay, look what it says. Joshua chapter 3, verse 14. So when the people broke into camp to cross the Jordan, the priest carrying the ark of the covenant went ahead of them. Now the Jordan is at a flood stage all during the harvest. Yet, as soon as the priests who carry the ark reach the Jordan and their feet touch the water edge, the water from the upstream stopped flowing. Like I like to say in my own words, this is brutal. Esto está brutal. This is just something incredible. You see, again, God has been calling for each one of us to step into our hardest moments and fully trust in God. And you might be saying, but it's just impossible. It's just impossible. That is exactly what God has been chosen you to do. He has been calling you because He knows you can do that. All you have to do is put your full trust in Him. You see, when I was called again to start a nonprofit organization doing that master's, I was ridiculed. I had nobody that will actually believe what I was being called to do, and I started a nonprofit organization helping people all over the world. To most people, that was extremely impossible. I had no money. I was actually in school, working, doing parts of the internship. It was just impossible. I had to put it in God's hands and fully trust in Him. And God, you show me what to do, because I have no idea. And trusting and continue to move forward each step, but God led the way each step. We have to trust. You have to get into our knees and pray to God. And let me tell you the last story here, because this is just something else. And we find it in the book of Matthew. The book of Matthew, okay? The book of Matthew in chapter 14. And we know this story very well. And it's Peter walking on the water. Now remember, they're in the midst of the storm, the darkest point of the night. They see what they think is a ghost. They are afraid. And Jesus automatically tells them, do not be afraid. Sounds similar to the verse that we read with Moses. Do not be afraid. And Peter says, Lord, if this is you, tell me to come to you. What did Jesus say? Come. You see, for Peter to walk on water, he had to depend fully on Jesus. Jesus did not stop the storm. We have to remember that. That is very crucial. He did not say, wait, storm, stop. Okay, Peter, now you're able to come out of that boat. No. Jesus called Peter amidst of the storm. Jesus is calling you amidst of your problems, of your troubles. He's calling you to do something radical. And Peter, because of his trust in God, he experienced something that the other 11 disciples did not experience, and that was walking in water. And we might say, oh yeah, but Peter, he missed his faith. He stopped looking at Jesus and he drowned. And yes, I'm going to tell you, at one point you will do the same thing. I have drowned myself as well. But there is the words that Peter says here, Lord, save me. And it says in the verse, immediately Jesus stretched out his hand and picked him up from the waters. You see, the walk of a Christian is never perfect. But when we are fully dependent on God, and when we fail, and we will fall at one point and another, if we say the same words that Peter said, Lord, save me, He is more than willing to pick us up and put us back on the boat. He will walk beside us. He will rescue you, and that's His promise. Don't delay anymore. God has called you to do something radical. Now, are you willing to step out?